coming up on this episode of the Elite Recruiter Podcast.
So, Pinnacle Society, I mean, you just feel like you've made it when you're a part of it, right? Just the talent that is in that room is just unbelievable. I feel like a kindergartner, quite frankly, when I'm in the room with these people.
Why didn't you quit then?
I was told by my dad that I was not allowed to quit until after I made a placement. Because he's like, if you quit before then, you're just a quitter.
Welcome to the Elite Recruiter Podcast with your host, Benjamin Mena, where we focus on what it takes to win in the recruiting game. We cover it all from sales, marketing, mindset, money, leadership, and placements.
I am so excited about this episode of the podcast. I have my special guest who is a top biller year after year after year and is also teaching people in her office, how to do what she does. She has built millions of dollars and she is leading a team. So I am so excited to have Jen Meyer here as part of the podcast. So Jen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Benjamin. How you doing?
Doing good. So real quick, there's two things I want to get started on. First of all, why did you join the Pinnacle Society? And then after that, how did you end up in the wonderful world of recruiting?
$1 million question. So Pinnacle Society, I mean, you just feel like you've made it when you're a part of it, right? Just the talent that is in that room is just unbelievable. I feel like a kindergartner, quite frankly, when I'm in the room with these people. I had been made aware of Pinnacle Society years and years and years ago. I mean, back in like 2008, and timing wasn't right for me. I was going through some stuff, but I felt so honored to have been at least approached about it. And then time just kind of went on. And so when I was approached about it this time, I think at the end of the day, you get to a point where you just feel like you're floating, like your learning has been capped. You're going through the motions of the business, highs, lows, you're used to it. And you just need that thing to like reignite your excitement about it and to be around people that it's very hard to find people in this business that have had the success that they've had and have still have a tremendous amount of humility around it. So the minute I got in there and had the opportunity to meet some of these people, I just knew they were my people, and it was great. I love it. I love these people.
That's awesome. And I'm going to ask you some more questions about it as we go through the interview. We always get started, at least how I set up the podcast. How did you even end up in this wonderful world?
Yeah. So I grew up in the business, frankly. I mean, my dad was a recruiter growing up. I swore I would never get into it. I mean, I'm an outdoor rec major in college, so I can, hand out basketballs at the YMCA, organize a checklist. I never thought to myself that I would be in a corporate world or a recruiting world. It just wasn't a part of it. And then I was approached when I was graduating. I had to do an internship. And there was a woman who had an office and she said, look, come out here. I'll teach you everything that you need to know about business and sales. And I'll sign all your internship papers. And then you can go on your merry way and live your life. And I thought, I was in my pajamas. I was like, great. Sounds good to me. And then I got into it. And honestly, I just fell in love with it. I have a natural intrigue about people. And so I loved learning about people and cultures and lifestyles and what made people tick and why things worked and didn't work and how I could solve that. And, here we are, 28 years later. So,
Time flies, right?
Time flies.
You got into recruiting. When is the point that you actually decided to start your own business?
So I was in an office that I started as a fulfillment recruiter for the owner, then moved into an AE role right about maybe a year, 18 months later. And then I moved into a billing manager role shortly after that. So I was already in a position where I was basically running the office. It just wasn't mine. And I think, I was 28 years old. I was recently married, no kids, no real responsibilities from that perspective. And I've always had such a strong entrepreneurial spirit. And I don't even know, actually I do know, and I don't know if it's appropriate to say, there was a situation that happened where my owner was going to hire somebody that I just did not agree with morally and ethically. It had nothing to do with what his potential capabilities could have been. And I just went home and I thought, what am I doing? And so I just felt like if I didn't do it then, when was I going to be able to do it? And so I just felt like I had to take the risk and the plunge. And it was in 2002, in the recession. People thought I was crazy. I was running $1 million practice at the time. And I just jumped ship and upheld my non-compete and started all over again.
How long were you sitting on the sidelines with that non-compete?
It was a year non-compete. My intention was to step away for a year and then circle back and get back into it. And then I got away from it and I was doing so well that I just never got back into the original space I was in. I moved away.
So how long did you have your own business? Because I know that you've joined, listening to your story, reading up on your story, you joined Goig, but for a long time, you had your own business,
almost 14 years.
Talk about the ins and outs of that before we talk about jumping into Goig.
Yeah. So my business was probably structured very similarly to a lot of other businesses. I was a billing manager, which is the hardest job out there, right? Like it's so hard to look at somebody and say, I'm going to teach you everything that, you need to know about this business and I'm going to be here to support you. And then the minute the phone rings with your client or candidate on the other line, you're like, oh, can you hold on? I have to make this deal happen. So it's a really hard balance, but it's super profitable. So I was a main rainmaker, and then I had 10 people in the office in total between other account executives and then some, internet researchers and support people. I was always super business development minded, not in the beginning, but I've become that. And I'm really good at pivoting and recalibrating when necessary. So even in the highs and lows of the economy, I never took a dip in my business because it was super manageable. When I was the major biller, I could pivot easily versus telling somebody else to do it. So that was beneficial to me. And so, I think at the end of the day, when I was approached up by Goig, I was doing well. I've always been highly ranked amongst my peers and I was making great money and I, had created a great lifestyle for myself. But the pressure of being responsible for all of these families under me that worked for me on top of my own family was a lot. And I was 42. I was living in Cleveland. I'm from Arizona. I'd grown up in Arizona. And so the opportunity to come back to Arizona certainly was a huge plus. I did tell Todd Goig that if he lived in like the Dakotas or something, the conversation would have stopped at hello. But because he was back in Arizona, it continued. But I hated the administrative part. I mean, I would have rather put pins in my eyes than sit there and deal with, the bankers and payroll and, accountants and attorneys and contracts and all of that stuff. Like I wasn't that person. And so I did it and I did well with it. I ran a profitable business, but I hated it. And so when I was given the opportunity from Todd to say, come in and we'll do all that and you just be in your lane and do what you do best, I just was like, well, I'm not sure if it'll work because I haven't reported to anybody in 14 years and I'm a nightmare to manage. But I felt like if I didn't try it, I would have regretted that more than trying it and not working out. And I will tell you, there's no other person on this planet that I would have done it for other than Todd. I mean, just great guy.
For the listeners and the rest of the Pinnacle Society, what do you do with Goig?
So my role has actually evolved this year. So we're still trying to figure that out. But up until now, so we have basically three main business units within our organization. And I had taken over one of those business units for a woman that had been retiring after 32 years and stepping into that role. So I did that for the last 8 years. And then in January, but I was always really, again, business development minded and recognized that we had a shortcoming in that area in our organization. And we had, really 6 key people, maybe 8 that drove a majority of the revenue in this office. And that's dangerous. Right. And so I'd come in and recognize that. So I was focusing a lot on that as, organically and holistically as an organization, but I was also running this business unit. And it got to the point where there was just a lot. And we weren't really able to get the development of account executives under our belt to where they could really, really learn that side of the business with me doing both. And so I promoted the person that worked underneath me to run that business unit. And then I stepped into a role where I basically run all the people and business development or recruiting efforts of the organization. And then the president, he does all the operations side.
Awesome. So there's a few things I definitely want to dig into. You mentioned earlier that you weren't good with BD early on.
Right.
And I think that's one of the biggest struggles that you see with recruiters out there is they can be great on the recruiting side of the house. But as soon as you put on that BD hat, it's just everything just disappears.
Correct.
How did you develop that? How did you get stronger? How did you do that?
So I was always great in having the conversations, right? So I didn't make a placement for the first 8 months in the business, embarrassingly enough. And that was in 96 when if you had half a brain, you could do well in this business. And so I finally had to just find my own voice in regards to just the authenticity of who I am, which is just super down to earth and just making people laugh. And again, just tapping into that natural curiosity of the why. And so once I did that and started to have those authentic conversations, I was great. And I was never afraid to call any level of person within an organization because I just always felt like we're all human, and you can't really sell anybody a job, right? I mean, that's their livelihood. So I kind of knocked that off my mindset. It was when you came down to the fee negotiation that I was terrible. I mean, it was like, I would say, because how long have we been saying like we're 30% or whatever for ages? So I'd say, 30%. And I would like sink down in my chair and I basically whisper it out, right? Like, what's your fee? I'd be like, 30%, and they would say, well, we pay 20. And I'd be like, okay. Like, I wanted it to be off the table. And then I think what the big shift for me really was that when I started to look at it, okay, you make these recruit calls and you kind of tap it into 4 pillars. If somebody's open to exploring an opportunity and you say, okay, we're going to look at it and we're going to go, what type of company do you want to work for? What type of culture do you want to be a part of? What type of role do you want? What does the money look like? And you were very comfortable with having that conversation because it didn't cost anybody anything, right? But that conversation really is so mirrored within the business development side and just understanding like, okay, so what type of company are you trying to build product-wise? What type of culture are you trying to build? What type of roles are stopping you or getting in the way of you being able to be your best self or best organization? Then I wasn't so, because I think what the block that people get with business development is they go, I don't know what to ask next. I don't know where to take the conversation. And if you've been a recruiter and a fulfillment person and you just take the conversation to the simple place of what would I need to know to be able to entice somebody and disturb their peace of mind of where they're at to make a move, just ask that, right? Like it doesn't need to be said in a certain way. It doesn't need to be done in a certain way. Just ask the question. When I got into that mindset and saw, okay, it's all mirrored, it's all the same questions, then it was just game on, right? And then with the negotiation side, I stopped talking about it. And I've gone back to where I talk about it. But for the purpose of just that bridge, when people would say, first of all, when they would come up and say, what's your fee early in the conversation, I would say, well, that's basically recruiting malpractice. If I tell you right now, you don't go to a doctor and expect them to diagnose you without doing some sort of evaluation. Well, it's the same in this. One, I have no idea if I can even help you because I don't know what your problem is. So that's first and foremost, because if I can't help you and I'm not a good resource, it doesn't matter what my fee is. And 2, I can't determine that because I don't know what my role in this is, in regards to what type of team I would have to put together, what type of energy has to be put out, all of those things. So let's talk about that first. And then what I would do is say, now that I have all the information, I'm going to send you a proposal. So yeah, I probably went the wimpy way out because I was just afraid to have the conversation. But it really did make it seem like I put all of these thoughts into what can we put together to make it cost effective and a fair and equitable partnership between the both parties. When really my fee was my fee, right? But to them, it made it seem like I was doing it. And then I could have the rebuttal conversation with them, negotiation wise, but it was a starting point. That then evolved to where then obviously I could have the conversation, live. But at the time I couldn't do it.
I mean, it's one of those things, like if you, in a conversation, if like someone's asking you the questions and you're like, well, that's malpractice. Like, first of all, like, I don't think any other recruiter has probably told them that before. And I think that's a kind of a great segue. And one of the things that I know Rich was talking about with you, and, credit to Mark Whitby. I love his podcast. I love him as a coach. Like, he's one of the best out there. But you started talking about things that I don't hear that often in recruiting. I think called pattern interruption. For everybody listening, what does pattern interruption mean before we start walking through some examples of it?
Yeah. So, and this is something I learned really early in my career. It was a gentleman who was in the business and he used to actually be a military interrogator. So I don't know how it's used like fully as that side of the business, but if we were going to just take it from a recruiting piece, it's the idea that people get trained to respond to certain things or say certain things based on what the pattern has been. So the most common or easiest way to describe it is when you say to somebody like, I say, hey, Benjamin, how are you? What's your typical response?
Doing great. How about yourself?
Exactly. It's like, I'm good. How are you? Right? Or if you walk into a store and you're there to find something, but a salesperson comes up and is like, hi, can I help you find something? Your immediate reaction is, I'm just looking, right? But we've been trained to do that, to say those things. If you break that pattern by saying something just a little bit differently, using a different word, using a different style, using a different order in which you're saying things or asking things, then people are thrown off, and then you get their true selves versus what their knee-jerk reaction is based on the pattern. So that's what I was taught early.
So, and first of all, I feel like I need to go, like I've done a lot of recruiting, hiring interrogators for different military organizations and other organizations. So now I feel like I need to go back to recruit them to become recruiters. That's a whole nother story.
100%.
So can you give some examples on the business development side or the MPC marketing side? Like how would you use a pattern interruption in a conversation like that?
It could be something as simple as, and I talk a lot about this, how you approach even the first 30 seconds of the conversation. So with MPC marketing, the biggest thing for me is why I couldn't get behind MPC marketing was I felt it was super presumptuous and arrogant for me to come to somebody that I didn't know and say, I've got the perfect candidate for you. And I can do that if you're a client and I can say, hey, Benjamin, I don't know if you're looking for somebody like this, but I'm telling you this person would fit perfectly in your organization and this is why. But when I don't know you, how do you really say that? And there's a lot of people that are comfortable saying it, more power to them. I never was comfortable. And so I developed this approach to say, look, I don't know if the person is right for you or not. I don't know what type of value this person could bring for you, but I do believe based on my knowledge of the industry that this person has a skill set that's very attractive because, or what they've done is this. So I figured we're both adults. We can talk about it, figure out if it makes sense to further the conversation and go from there. And it just but it's a very casual, it's not this in your face, and they're not used to that. And so all of a sudden their back just comes off the wall of okay, this person's not going to try to oversell me on why I should look at this individual because she doesn't know me and she has no idea. But let's just talk about it, So there's that, there's the piece that, and again, people that know me have heard me say this a gazillion times. When they answer the phone and they say, hey, Benjamin, this is Jen Meyer. I'm the Senior Vice President, Goig and Associates. How are you? They're like, oh God, a salesperson, right? They just know. And so I've switched it up in here to where the team is always like, can you hear me okay? It's this is who I am. Can you hear me okay? And it's yeah, I can hear you fine. Okay, I've just been having some headset issues. But anyway, and you just go on, right? They're not used to that navigation of the conversation. So it just disrupts it enough to where they don't get that knee-jerk reaction of we're not hiring, well, whatever,
Because just listening to that and the way that you're talking about it, how often have us recruiters had these conversations? We're almost having the exact same conversation that every other recruiter is actually having, even though that we think that we're special.
Exactly. We're part of the MRI network, Management Recruiters. And, Management Recruiters was developed 60 years ago or whatever it is now. And everybody learned the same. We all learned the same way. And you just nailed it, Benjamin. All of us think that we're unique in our way of saying things or what we do, but all roads lead to the same thing, and we're all saying it the same. And one of the biggest mistakes is that we've trained our potential clients or companies out there that the minute we call, they say one of 5 things. We don't use recruiters, send a resume, we're not hiring, what's your fee? They say one of 5 things. So if we can divert that to where we're now directing the conversation a little bit better, it changes the dialogue.
Is there any pattern interruption examples that you would also use on the recruiting side of the desk?
So a couple things that I would say. I take the same approach with recruiting that I just talked to you about. I don't know if this is the right opportunity for you. I don't know you at all, but let me tell you a little bit about it. We can determine if it's something we want to explore further, right? So I take a very casual approach there. Secondarily, you mentioned a lot of people have trouble with the business development side. And so we have a lot of good recruiters, but we don't teach them how to maximize those conversations. Because the reality is that I think it's upwards of 18 to 20% call us back of the voicemails that we leave or the output that we do on the recruiting side. Less than 1%, it happens on the business development side. So it's if you have somebody on the phone from a recruiting side, take advantage of that and change the conversation and flip it. But again, our candidates are used to us saying, hey, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you, but how are you doing on, how's your team doing? Are you hiring within your organization? I mean, that's the conversation, right? So what I try to do is change it a little bit from a recruiting standpoint of one, again, they're used to us saying, well, what else are you exploring or where else have you interviewed? So I don't put you in front of those companies, right? But when really we're trying to find leads, So I may say that. I may say, how's your interviewing going? Even if they said they're not looking, I'll say, how's interviewing going? And they'll say either, oh, I haven't interviewed anywhere. Oh, well, why not? Or they'll say, oh, it's going okay. Well, I mean, how many have you gone on? 3. Oh, well, where are you on that process? Oh, and who was that with? So it's just like coming in through the side door and that's really to get leads that are out there. So there's a business development technique there. I'll use it a lot on reference checks in the sense where I'll say, because usually we're doing reference checks when we know we're getting an offer, right? Or up to an offer. If you were to back that in and do it earlier in the process, even if it's after the first interview, one of them, not all of them, and you were a reference for a person that I was working with, my reference check to you would be a normal reference. And then usually you would say, or I would bring up that we're not at a stage of an offer with this person at this time. Or you may say, oh, what are they interviewing for? And at that point, I would say, well, it's very early in the process, but I always want to do a third-party endorsement for everybody that I work with to make sure that they are who they say they are. Don't your recruiters do that, Benjamin? And they'll usually go, no. And I'll go, oh, that's interesting. Anyway, and I'll just move on. And I won't go in for the kill and then I'll circle back. But I'm planting this quality thing that I do along the way. So it's just small things like that you can do outside of just hard charging business development.
So there's 2 ways I want to go, but the way I want to go first with this is you were talking about recruiters having these conversations, way more conversations than a salesperson has when they're just banging for sales calls. Mm-hmm. But you're turning everything into opening up for leads. Doing some homework on you, I found that you actually encourage that in your office. Can you talk about lead development, encouraging that, and the structure that you have to really just set that up for success with a team?
I mean, unfortunately, we just very recently lost her. She passed away, but one of the legends in our business, I mean, she has been $1 million producer before $1 million producers even existed. She built her entire business on recruiting. She never, ever made a business development call, which is crazy. And so a lot can come out of recruiting, but unfortunately, recruiters get blinders on, and that's the direction that they go. So, like any good salesperson, you have to be incentivized to do it. And we're still kind of working through the tweak of this, but in the business unit I worked in, or I was overseeing, we did have a 10% lead generation aspect to our split arrangement. So there was this encouragement to if you got the lead and you turned it into a search, you got whatever that is, right? But at the very least, get the lead and bubble it up to somebody that is a little bit more experienced in that arena. And then you would still get your little piece for it, and you'd have right of first refusal to recruit on it. Right. So you really still could get more of the piece of the pie. And then we had a KPI around it. We had an expectation that they had to develop 2 leads a week, off of their recruiting, because they have to be mindful of it. If you don't put that in place where you're saying you need to focus on this, then it just, their focus is fulfilling the positions that they're working on.
When I was listening to that, it took me back to my first recruiting job way back when, and I ended up opening up out of happen chance, a multi-million-dollar account. And then they redrew my district and took it completely away from me. And I'm like, oh, no. I had to train the recruiter that did this. And that recruiter ended up having a single account that took her to the President's Club. And they actually, at the end of the year, was just like, well, you should have worked harder. And I was just like,
that was salt in the wound.
And I was just thinking, man, talk about a structure to set up success and a structure to encourage it.
After it's habitual, you don't need to encourage it any more, right? Because people are just encouraged by the fact that they can make more money. But in the beginning, there's got to be you got to put some incentive in there. I mean, we're all money motivated. We wouldn't be in this business if we weren't. So you got to put something tied to it. But I laugh at that story because I'm like, God, we're all guilty of doing things within our own office, which is why people get recruited, because they're, mad at the management team for, messing with their money. So, but we do the same thing, I guess. Well, your company did anyway. We do.
But taking this conversation in another direction, Like doing pattern interruption and thinking about things different means you've spent time, effort, energy thinking about the words in our business, the words we're saying. And I feel like words has a huge impact on how we think, what we do, our actions. I know this is a conversation that we had before we hit record a little while ago. You think words are a huge part of a recruiter's success. Can you talk about that?
I think words are a huge part of recruiter success. I think that if people could be more mindful of how their words land on other people, and I mean, listen, Benjamin, you and I could get into a very deep conversation about how that you should live your personal life like that as well. But if we're talking business, if people would just speak to people in a way that they knew that other person was going to hear them versus how they wanted to say it, it would change their word. They would change their words. Right? Because a lot of times we look at it from a viewpoint of a lens of, well, what would I want to be told? Right? Like, how would I hear it? But that doesn't mean that's how the other person hears it. The laws of interpretation are endless. If I say the word pizza, what do you say? Like, what's the first word that comes to your mind?
Like a slice of pizza? Slice?
Okay. My first is New York, right? One word that is universal and everybody knows, but somebody's going to think of things differently because it's based on their own lens, right? So if I use words that open up that opportunity for that person to describe what it means to them versus you trying to be a recruiter that's boasting about how much we know and how much we know about an industry and how good we are and all of these things, it's going to change the conversation. And I think a lot of us as recruiters, we were taught that we needed to be experts in our industry, which I don't disagree with. But the reality is I need to be an expert in talent acquisition and people and psychology and solving people's problems. I used to recruit most recently in the building products arena. And I worked with a lot of carpet manufacturers. And I'm telling you, all I knew about carpet was that it was fuzzy side up. Like I didn't need to know how it was manufactured and how it was sold and all of these things. Like all I needed to know was what is the infrastructure and culture of your organization? Because that's my lane. And I can connect those dots. You worry about your industry and I'll worry about my industry. And together we will make magic. But I'm not going to sit here and get into a pissing match with you about who knows more about the business. When I started to shift my words to get them to hear that, and not interpret what they were saying for them, it just changed the conversations.
You come off as very curious. You come off as inquisitive. You come off as super friendly. I know in recruiting, a lot of times, you have a script that works. Like MRI is perfect when it comes to this is how you recruit. Mm-hmm. Did you have to with your curiosity and how you approach things and how you think about things, almost rewrite the scripts for yourself?
In the beginning, I used other people's scripts because I was like, I'm not going to come in and say I know more than you do. You've been doing this, right? So I really was given the scripts. Over time, yes, I had to work them into what my comfort level was. And my comfort level was, I was 21 years old when I got in this business. I said I was an outdoor rec major. I started in this business working in the logistics industry and I didn't even know how to spell it. I was like, I cannot be on the hot seat. And so how I reworked the script was to just ask a lot of questions and take it off of me talking very early in the conversation. Because what was I going to talk about? I didn't know anything. And then that style just continued. And I don't think you can teach somebody to be curious. I think that you're either a curious person or you're not. But yes, I do have a natural curiosity about people.
I want to jump to one more question that I have before we head over to the Pinnacle pointers. So most people outside of MRI, when they think of the word planning, they could think of my 3 things I need to do today, and that's about it. What I have learned, because I didn't grow up in the MRI network in my recruiting career, planning means a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. And I know that you've talked about your team and how important it is to plan and how you're what is actually going to happen? Can you explain what planning is and then also what you expect from your team when it comes to their planning?
So there is a huge difference between a plan and a list, right? And we all fall into the list category. Well, I got a list, right? And I used to laugh with my team because I said, I think for the first 5 years of my business, I didn't place any candidate that's last name was after the letter M, right? Because you'd start at A and you'd get to about M and you'd find your 3 candidates and you'd move on, right? And so I said, at the very least, flip that ascending, descending order and start at Z because those people are never getting phone calls. I'm very much into time blocking. I am a very, very high energy person. So sitting in a chair for 8 hours a day on the phone is super hard for me. So I very early on had to block it out by hours or hour and a half to where, I gave myself that permission to have these like little short incremental time away from having to just, call. And because of that, I was able to just say, okay, I know I'll get to my email later, right? I also, from a planning perspective, I'm a shiny object like squirrel, like most of us are. We're all ADHD, whether we've been diagnosed or not. You have to like do yourself favors, shut your email down, shut your notifications down, turn off your ringer of your cell phone. If people need to get a hold of you, they will. Nothing is going to blow up so much in the next hour that it's going to cost you your career. And so I had to train myself to a discipline to work the way I need to work, which is not to have all these things going on around me because I have a really hard time focusing. So that was first and foremost. So it's like time block your day, be realistic about it, know who you are and what works for you. If you're a morning person, then put your most important calls in the morning. If you're not a morning person, then start those most important calls at 10 o'clock. Like it doesn't really matter. It matters that you're just true to who you are and working within your own personality. When it comes to, the lists and stuff, it's like, it's really important that you go through and you prioritize these things, right? Like you should be able to open up a plan and say, in this hour, I need to call these 20 people. And you've already looked at them. You already know those are the 20 people because those are going to be the people that are going to be the closest to your money, right? And closest to the probability of either being a candidate or being a hiring manager versus I'm just going to run down this list and it's never ending. And when whatever I get through, and whatever I don't will be tomorrow. So it's like, set your goals hourly, set your goals daily. At the very least, if you don't get to them, send an email to those people saying, I meant to get to you today. And I always do a delayed email to like a 9 o'clock at night email because they think I'm still working. So that's a little nugget. Commit and be task oriented and not time oriented, right? Like commit to what you need to accomplish that day to move that needle forward. The other thing is that the first question I ask myself, and I think that people should be asking themselves, is where are your sendouts coming from? Where are your sendouts coming from? Because that's going to guide you. Either your sendout is coming from the fact that you need to MPC market. It may come from you need to find a candidate to CDS in order to, get a sendout. It may be that you need to find a job order, like whatever it is. But that's the number one question I ask myself every day is like, where are my sendouts coming from today? And that's how I prioritize my time.
Absolutely love that. And like when it comes to sendouts and everything, like what is working right now with you guys and business development?
We still, for the most part, we have a lot of people that still MPC market. If you're thinking about like strategy wise, just because, and it's not always that we'll place that candidate, but it's definitely that it opens the dialogue for conversation. And it's easier to call somebody when you have something in hand versus I want to call to introduce myself. Nobody has time for that. So, that's our biggest business development push. But, we have the average tenure in our office is 10 years. So we have some pretty tenured individuals that have great networks and we do a lot of conferences. We do a lot of speaking engagements. We're just really, really active and outward facing individuals. So I don't think that there's any one thing that is working the best. I think it's compounded, with everything and making the most out of every single conversation that you're having in every aspect of this business.
I love that. And it's one of the things I've heard you say time and time again, like these conversations that you're having, just like recruiters need to go deeper. They need to
Yes.
relationship wise, this is where you can get your next client from. It's,
Yeah.
I think you've said it in multiple other places that recruiters are really missing out on those conversations.
100%. We all get very tunnel visioned into what do we need to accomplish in this minute versus what's the bigger picture.
All right. And so before we jump over to like the quick fire questions, the Pinnacle pointers, is there anything else that you'd love to share about anything we've already covered?
No, I think that's really, I think that the biggest thing is that, the business isn't easy. I don't want to say it's hard, right? Like, fighting cancer is hard, or laying asphalt in, Phoenix in the summer is hard, right? I'm sitting in an air conditioned office. I don't even have to pick up the phone anymore. Like, it's not hard. It's just mentally challenging, and you have to be able to mentally spar with yourself through it and try new things, like take risks. We're not doctors. Nobody's going to die if you don't say the right thing. So you just have to be willing to just try it. And, there's no right or wrong unless it's illegal, right? Like, stay legal, stay above for it, but just try it. Be bold.
For somebody that's just getting started as a recruiter this year, what advice would you give them to see success in their career?
I think that if you're getting into the business right now, I think that I'm just going to say it's still a numbers game, right? And I think that the people that I've seen not succeed are the people that come in and they try to reinvent the wheel, or they try to think that they know more than the person that's trying to train them knows. And there is a reason why it's worked for the last 60 years. And yeah, there may be tweaks and, certain resources that can be used nowadays that we didn't have 25 years ago. But at the end of the day, it's still a people business. And you've got to just, however you get that to the end result of getting people on the phone, can be different depending on, industries and who they are. But you need to be talking to as many people a day as you can every day, and put in the extra time, right? Like, have 2 days a week where you work late hours. The more you dedicate yourself in the beginning to learning the industry and learning the business and talking to as many people as you can, the better off you're going to be in the long run. It's just numbers, simple math.
Same question, but for somebody that's been in the game 5, 20 years, 20, 30 years, what advice would you give to them to keep on seeing success?
I think that all of us in the business, we've evolved over time. Hopefully, you're not a 20-year rookie, but I think most of us have evolved over time. And I think that we kind of get lazy. I hate to say it, but like, we start to see success and we stop doing all of the stuff that works so well for us. And so the one thing I would tell recruiters is stay on your metrics. It's something we all hate to do. Your metrics are going to be very different than my metrics, that are going to be very different than Rich's metrics. Everybody's metrics are different, but know your own metrics, because when you know your metrics, you can see the trends before they happen. When we hit 08 or 07, and that next wave of recession was about to hit, I knew that I was going to close 80% of whatever was on my hot sheet all the time, from the time I was a year in the business. And I couldn't close a door if I tried. Everything I touched at that point fell apart, but I hadn't changed anything I was doing. So I was like, something's going on with the industry. Something is happening. So it changed my conversations. I started looking at it from a holistic, and I pivoted. I'm not kidding you, like 6 more months before it fell. And I still grew 13%, but I wouldn't have known to do that if I didn't know my metrics. And so I think that over time, as key recruiters or, successful recruiters, we just go, we know how to do the business. We know the business. We know how to do it. We don't know our numbers 99% of the time. We don't even know what our fee is 99% of the time. And we just move through the motions. And I think that if we knew our business, right, like get deep into the weeds of your business, you could pivot or recalibrate before you actually get there, which would save a lot. Or you could expand and grow a lot faster than you think you can.
How do you keep track of all your metrics over time?
So, we're in Crelate. I don't know what other people use out there. I will say that probably is one of the best platforms of their reporting structure that I've seen. I used to be on PC Recruiter for years and years and years. They're great. I helped them develop forever years ago. Like, I admire them tremendously. But there were always some gaps in their platform in that regard. And I do think that Crelate makes it very, very easy for customizable reports, that you could break it down every ratio you're looking for. As long as it's in the system, which again is a whole other conversation. As long as it's in the system, we'll be able to extract it out to find that report.
Awesome. What does the Pinnacle Society mean to you?
First and foremost, I haven't been in it very long. It's only been, I think, going on 2 years. I spoke at it years ago before I became a member, and I was in awe of just the whole experience. And I came into the Pinnacle Society, and one, I'm extraordinarily humbled by the fact that I'm in it. I mean, again, I wasn't kidding when I said, like, I sit next to these people and I feel like a kindergartner. But I just feel, it's so cliche, but I really, really do feel like it's just family. You know, we're all cut from the same cloth. Maybe we do the business a little bit different ways that are all successful. So there's no judgment one way or another. The ideas are incredible, the entrepreneurialness, the vulnerability. I mean, look, we're in a tough business and we are like a land of misfits, right? And you find your people, and it's an instant acceptance and an instant opportunity to learn, grow, cry, laugh. I mean, it's everything. It's everything. It's been incredible.
I love that. Has there been a book that's had a huge impact on your career?
So you're gonna laugh, and it's so elementary, but the one book that just stood with me all the time was, do you remember the book Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah, I felt like you were going to say that.
I am telling you that for whatever reason, it was the biggest impact of like, I'm not dealing with this, right? Like, I used to tell people, I'm like, you're not even moving my cheese or like making it moldy. Like, get away from me. I do not have the energy to do this. So for whatever reason, that book, I read it very early in my career, and it has definitely stuck with me.
Well, I mean, it stuck with you enough that when you were looking at your KPIs, when things were changing, you're like, my cheese is moving.
100%. Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah.
You've been a top biller for years. Like, you've been successful in this business, even with your own company now, and like kind of like with an agency. What do you think has been a driver of your own personal success?
And that shifted. Like, my driver early on in my career was really absolutely 100% money. I mean, it was a bonus and great that I was helping people while I was doing it. But I mean, I was extraordinarily money motivated. I am dysfunctionally competitive, right? Played collegiate soccer, swam my whole life. So I'm really competitive. And so it did fill that for me, that void of like competition, but it was money. I was not in it to be a social worker. That was for sure. Over time, it's definitely evolved to where that is great and it's still a driver. But I feel like my desire to teach people in this business how to do the business right and create an opportunity of a lifestyle for themselves is a much greater driver than my own personal financial gain out of it. And I'm older now. So, I mean, my kids are older. I'm 50, almost 50. Life evolves and changes for different reasons. But I love, again, knowing that I was a catalyst to solve somebody's problem, whether it's internally in Goig or a peer, a friend, a client, a candidate. Like, it's fun to know that you had a positive impact on people that way. And I was given, it wasn't handed to me. I had to work for it, but I was given an opportunity to provide a lifestyle for myself and my family that I would have never, ever had if I would have been a park ranger or whatever else I was going to be doing. Who knows what I was going to be doing, but I know for sure I would not have been making the money or had the lifestyle that I've had. So my experiences have been great. And if I can provide that opportunity, they have to work for it. But if I can provide that opportunity for people and to have this business be a respectable business. Like, I don't want it to be that we're just slimy and in it for the wrong reasons and not realizing that we, affect people's lives. I don't want to be a part of that. So if I can impact people to do the business and do business right and for the right reasons, then I'm all for it.
Before I ask the last question or the last set of questions, you said you didn't make a placement for 8 months, which I've seen some of the best recruiters struggle when they first started. Why didn't they fire you?
I should have fired myself. Listen, I quit 7 times. I swear to God. I was too poor and didn't have a car, so I couldn't drive home. But I think that, I don't know. I guess you have to ask them why they didn't fire me. My assumption.
Why didn't you quit then?
I was told by my dad that I was not allowed to quit until after I made a placement. Because he's like, if you quit before then, you're just a quitter. Like, you're not up for the hard work, which, he was a New York Italian. And so like, I was going to prove him wrong, right? I mean, it was a dad-daughter relationship. But he said, if you quit after you've made a placement, where that's supposed to be the height of it, when you're most excitable, like you slayed the dragon, then you don't like the business. The business isn't right for you. And so I made a promise that I was not going to quit until after I made a placement. And I didn't make a placement for 8 months. Then you make the placement and you realize how great it is. And you're like, okay, I feel like I've ripped the Band-Aid off and we're good to go. Now, from that last 4 months in the business, I mean, the floodgates opened. It's like it just started to click. And I ended up billing like $300,000 in that last 4 months. And that was back in 96, 97. So, I mean, that was a lot of money at the time. But I did try to quit. And I'm not kidding. The last time I tried to quit, I didn't have a car. So I couldn't go anywhere. So I just figured, well, I guess I'll get back on the business, back on the phones. But I think they didn't fire me because my heart was in it and I worked very, very hard. And I think they just had the faith in me. They were like, she's not trying to make the easy way out. She's leaning in. She's doing all these things. They didn't have a desk to give me. So I was starting from complete scratch in an area that they didn't specialize in. So I just think there was a lot of little things like that. I'm very, very grateful they did not fire me. Now, at the time, I was hoping they would have fired me because I was miserable.
Well, that goes into the next question. Like everything that you know now, if you had the chance to sit down with yourself within that first 8 months, what advice would you tell yourself?
I talk about that thing of planning. I wish I would have just been a little bit more strategic in my approach. I think a lot of why I wasn't successful in the beginning is because I just didn't have any framework of why or how I should be calling or what my cadence should have been at the time to get there. It was just like, I'm just going to plow through this, right? And I did seek out a lot of great mentors in the business who I attribute a lot of my success to because they taught me a ton. But I think that I didn't really learn from my own mistakes, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like I just kept beating my head up against the wall, not scared to make the mistakes, but I didn't learn as quickly. I wasn't as fast to learning as quickly on that. I just kind of, definition of insanity, kept doing the same thing, expecting different results. And I finally got there, but I probably would have gotten there a lot quicker.
And I want to ask that question again, going back in time to, when you had your own business.
Mm-hmm.
You know a lot about the world now. You understand the ins and outs. What advice would you give yourself when you launched your own company?
I don't know if I would have gone into business for myself if I knew then what I know now. Like, it sounds silly, but it's like, it was great for me. I wouldn't have changed it because I can't, right? Like, it was what it was. But I do think that if I would have found the opportunity to know my own strengths and be in the right pocket of my lane earlier in my career and focused on that versus trying to do things that didn't come easy to me and spending so much energy on that, I would have just excelled, probably bigger than I did. But I was so honed in on feeling like, the next natural step was for me to own my own business. And so that's what I should do. Versus like, it's okay to be an account executive working for somebody else. Let them deal with all that if you really don't want to do it. And you focus on your lane and look at it from a holistic business view versus what's my fee on one placement. But like, what are the possibilities on a greater scale, from a W-2 perspective versus a singular placement? I don't know if I would have opened my own business. I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for, but I don't know if I would have.
No, and that's why I love asking this question is because, it was your business for 14 years. Like, talk about a lesson learned. Like, you now are in your lane winning.
Yep.
Maybe you wouldn't have got there. Maybe you would have gotten there sooner.
Maybe. And listen, there was a lot of lessons learned, and I'm probably better in this role now because I did own my own business, right? But you understand what the financials are and you understand how operations work. And I can have probably a little bit more strategic conversations with my clients that I probably wouldn't have been able to have if I wasn't like in the seat. I can say things that maybe other people can't say in the sense of like, look, I was a business owner and I wouldn't pay a fee if I didn't have to, right? Like, so that's, it's stupid to spend money if you don't have to spend money, or, it's things like that I can take my experiences and use to my advantage when I'm talking to companies. But I don't know. It was a lot. It's probably, it's a gray hair here because I'm pretty sure that came from.
Well, Jen, for anybody that would love to follow you, how do they go about doing that?
I am on LinkedIn. I don't do the Twitter thing. I don't do podcasts myself. I do them with people like yourself that have me. So thank you. They could find me at Goig, Facebook. I don't know, probably the normal ways that anybody would find me.
Awesome. Well, before I let you go, is there anything else that you'd love to share with the listeners?
For me, again, I cannot speak highly enough about recruiting. And I just would encourage people to just be bold, right? And I would encourage people to think differently about the business because our clients and our candidates are a lot more savvy. They're very smart individuals. And, we got to stay ahead of them. So never stop learning. That's what makes the business fun. There's no one way to do it.
Awesome. Well, Jen, I'm so excited to chat with you. Thank you for sharing today. I know Rich Rosen has been talking about you nonstop.
Rich is great. See, he's one of those that I've barely met him, and it's like he's like a brother from another mother.
Well, for the listeners, I want you guys to keep crushing it and make 2024 your best year yet. Thank you, guys.